Okay, enough of that. Hi, how are you all today? So please don't throw anything at me. I'm from Toronto, so go Raptors. And I'm very thankful that you guys stuck around because I know the game starts in an hour, so I do appreciate that. So today I'm going to be talking about, the title is DDoS, Barbarians of the Gateway, but I don't stick strictly to denial of service. I talk about some web attacks and things to that effect, as well as some threat actors and that sort of thing. So why am I actually standing up here in front of you and talking to you? Well, I have been doing this for far longer than I care to admit. Before I joined vendor world, I was a defender for a better part of about 2 decades. I have done everything from being a firewall admin to pen tester to a acting CISO. I got plenty of scar tissue to show for it, and yeah, I learned very early on that if you want a CISO role, wear Kevlar, and if you want a friend, buy a dog. So as a result of all the time that I spent in the trenches, I gathered a lot of stories along the way. Because one of the things I learned before I ever got into this industry, I used to work for a record company called MCA Records. And my boss there taught me something very early on, was to carry a notebook with me wherever I went. So I kept copious notes for 2 decades. So as a result, there's a lot of very interesting stories, not all of which I can tell, that I've collected along the way. Because I've done work in the DoD, I've done work for multiple financial institutions as well as power companies. I did 9 years in power systems, and if you want to talk about a vertical that needs all the security help it can get your resume and go find one of them. So I write now for CSO Online as well as Forbes, and I did once for Huffington Post, and yeah, don't think I'll go back. But it's been an interesting ride, including doing 3 years on the board of directors for ISC Squared. So whenever I hear people sniping about ISC Squared, it is one of those moments where I have to scratch my head and going, okay, let's sit down and talk, but I'm not going to do it right now. And as well, one of my favorite things is I get to goon for DEF CON as a speaker goon. Now, with the weather finally getting warmer in Canada, you can actually see Canadians in our natural state, which is not Florida. That's the winter. And as we go along here, it's just one of those things I like to throw out there. But now I work for a company called HackMiami Technologies. I know some of you in here are current or former HackMiami folks. Pleasure. And I've been very fortunate in the role that I have, because the role I have, I get to go around the world and talk to folks about security. And I'm not a sales guy. It's a fun role. I'm the guy that gets to go in there with the blazer and the jeans, and the guys go, oh, and the ladies go, oh, okay, all right, you're the techie. Okay, good, you can stay, sales guy out in the hallway. Which, when I was a defender, I actually did that to multiple sales folks. And before I go too far, there's one thing I want to throw out as a clarification. I also do work with Securosis, which is an analyst firm, which is now pivoting to a cloud operator. One of the things that Securosis did was create the CCSK exam for the Cloud Security Alliance. Now, I saw a talk yesterday where the gentleman said that CSA didn't have their own certification. They do, if you want to look into it. I just wanted to clarify that one point. So why am I here? Why am I talking to you guys? I get extremely frustrated every time I read the news. Every time I see yet another 60 Minutes piece that drives me absolutely bonkers because of absolute grave factual errors. It becomes very frustrating. It only just occurred to me right now that I'm actually being videotaped. That's unnerving. I thought you were just doing audio. Okay. And as these attacks go forward, it really is something that I get really frustrated with, because they like to lean on the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. They want you to be afraid for the sake of being afraid, rather than looking at, oh, wait, are these controls in place, actually having a look at the threat that's posed to you immediately. And while the threats can be While the threats can be real, you have to understand, what is the threat, and is it pertaining to you? Now, this is one of the things I enjoy, taking my kids over to a theme park in Toronto. And it looks real, and it seems real to my 2-year-old son. He's terrified of this thing. But it poses no threat except maybe gravity if something knocks it over. Now, my friend Eddie Mize, he came up with this one. This is a cyber pathogen at 1,000 times view. Now, the FBI tried very hard to convince the courts that this could be a real problem with respects to an iPhone that they were trying to break into, which I'm sure everybody in the room has read about at this point. And it bothers me to no end that the media gobbled this up without question. And this is where it absolutely left me wanting. So, what are we going to do? I'm going to go through, and I apologize for the screen resolution here. So some point in some of the slides that I go through, we're going to have the issue of size, so I will read them out to you. But here we have, I'm going to go through attackers, attacks, tools, trends, data, and where do we go from here? So one of the things that right out of the bat is the actors for hire. And this is something that I experienced early on when I got into this racket, as you could actually go out and hire folks that will actually do attacks for you. Now, these prices here on this list are actually from an actual underground site from a couple years ago, so it's a little bit dated right now. But if you go through here, you have WinLocker ransomware, $10 to $20, exploit bundles up to $3,000, botnets, $200 for 2,000 bots, and things to that effect, or an entire botnet for $700. So you have to realize that there's actually a full-blown industry here, which I'm sure most of the folks in this room understand. But this is not a problem. This is not a thing that has just sprung up overnight. This has been around for some time. Let's see if this is going to work. But take heart. There are the positive side. This was a site that stood up just over a year ago, the Hackers List, where you could actually contract hackers to actually come and do work for you. And I say hackers here because this is a positive bent. It's helping to test your site. When for the negative bent, I always say attackers, little nomenclature issue here. The only problem here is that within a week of this site going live, it was compromised and all of its credentials were shared. So I'll give him points for the attempt, but it's just to show that while you have negative actors that are available for hire, you also have some of the positive. But one of the things that really concerns me, and not so much from the point of view of are these a real threat more than annoyance, is the bored kids. You know, when I gave this talk a week ago, the audience was a lot more gray hair, and I said, how many people in the room had teenagers? Almost the entire room went up, and I said, okay, how many of these teenagers are at home, bored, playing with their Xbox, whatever it happens to be, and they all put their hands back up again? And I said, okay, so you have all these folks that are bored, looking for a reason, something to believe in, something to be a part of. They're at home. They have access to the internet. What could possibly go wrong? So the bored teenagers, the thing I worry about here is that we collectively need to do a better job of educating them because they are a disposable workforce. And this disposable workforce, and the reason I say it that way is in most jurisdictions that kids that will cause any sort of computer-based crime, if they go to jail, it's only for a minimal amount of time. And by the time they get out, they'll be able to readjust back into society fairly easy. But it doesn't have to be this way because lots of times it's due to an error in judgment. And these errors in judgment can come back to haunt you. For example, David Cameron recently had himself photographed with a baby pig, a piglet. And if anybody knows the story, well, just search David Cameron and pig and you'll get the whole story. I'll leave it at that. Now, this disposable workforce doesn't have to be this way. If we can do a better job of educating them so they know when things are wrong. And when I was a teenager, I'm so glad we didn't have the internet because, oh boy, it would not have ended well for me. And those disposable workforces get put into service by folks like the hacktivists, as an example, a chaotic actor that will happily employ them to do their work on their behalf. Now, most hacktivists are of a noble bent. They have a purpose. But the problem is with a moniker such as Anonymous, anybody and their brother can stand up a campaign. It'll be Operation whatever it happens to be. And it doesn't always end well. And the thing is, and I'll talk about this a little later on, is the tools that they provide these teenagers and things to that effect don't always have their best interest at heart. Then we have to look at the nation states. Is Ian in here? No? Good. I didn't make him have a fit of apoplexy. And there are different types of actors that makes me throw up, that show up in the media that are typically the standard villains. And then there's the arch villains. And I hope you appreciate, by virtue of the fact that I put this up here, I've actually broken the law in Russia. It's actually illegal to do that, but you know what? I'm not going there anytime soon. But when you look at threat actors, there are actually real concrete examples. Now, for a few years ago, there was the Al-Qassam cyber fighters. Now, this was a group ostensibly based in Iran that would attack financial organizations in and around North America. Unfortunately, they didn't do very well with geography. Now, full disclosure, being Canadian, this bothered me because they attacked Canada as well as the United States because, and I quote, we thought it was all the same thing. So they failed the geography. But they had a very good tool that was very effective against all these places that were, by and large, not having any sort of protection in place. And having worked at several financial institutions in the past, I knew the heartache that they were going through when they got hit. And QCF would attack. They'd say when they were going to attack, they would hit hard, and then they would be done exactly when they said they were going to be done. And if they got blocked, they could pivot very quickly. It was rather impressive in that sort of regard. But I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So different types of attacks that I'll go through rather loosely. Volumetric, protocol-based attacks, and application layer. And one of the things is, in this talk, the data that I pull, in full disclosure, I'm not going to vendor at you because I hate it when people do it to me, but this is data taken from our State of the Internet report. This is just the information that we collect from our own platform at HackMiami. Now, this is from Q4 of 2015. Our Q1 data hasn't been released yet, so that'll be in a couple weeks. But this is just a really great example of the attacks that we're seeing going across HTTPS. Local file inclusion, SQL injection, and cross-site scripting were the top 3. One of those has been on the OWASP top 10 for over a decade. Why is this still happening? Because people are still leaving themselves exposed. Then we'll look at the data of the types of attacks that are going over HTTP. Now, seeing as how it is an eye chart, again, LFI, SQL injection, and in this case, PHP injection, was number 3. These are all things that are actually solvable problems, so it's really frustrating to actually see these attacks happening because we know that they're effective. Why else would the attacker spend all their time? It's not because they have a tool and they're going click, click, next all the time, but it is really rather frustrating because these are solvable problems. So a lot of the types of attacks that we record in our data are, the typical SYN floods, ICMP floods, all the rest of it, but it gets into other interesting attacks as well. And volumetric is a great one. How many StarCraft fans do we have in the room here? Oh, okay, that's more than I expected. That's good. I thought I was the only old guy in the room. And whenever I use this to explain it to non-security folks, they get it very quickly because a lot of the non-security folks that are the same generation as myself, old, they understand this because they played this game at some point. And I said, a distributed denial of service attack is ultimately the Zerg coming and destroying all of your shit. And they get it. They understand. And that's part of the thing we have to do collectively is we have to go beyond the boundaries of what we're used to talking about. We're used to talking about security folks talking to security folks. We need to go beyond that. We need to talk at healthcare conferences. We need to talk at financial conferences, all these sort of things. But don't bring the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Bring the understanding and help them better equip themselves so they can make better decisions. So when they do ultimately get their shiny new website attacked and overwhelmed, they're not just sitting there in traffic wondering what just happened. So from an infrastructure perspective, when we're looking at these sort of things, this is again from Q4 of 2015, and I'll get out my trusty laser pointer, which I always put down. All the different types of things from DNS, NTP, all these types of attacks. In this particular year, one of the things that was down was SSDP, a Simple Service Discovery Protocol, which is part of the Universal Plug-and-Play protocol stack. Now, this quarter was the first time in about a year that we saw this drop. It's a great DDoS reflector. And when you have all kinds of universal plug-and-play devices that are being deployed and having internet accessible, they become easily conscripted into botnets of all sorts of shapes and sizes. Now, one of the things I did is I wrote an article about this, about SSDP, that showed up in Forbes, and I got a nasty letter from the Universal Plug-and-Play Consortium. I had no idea this even existed. They were very upset with me, and they said, universal plug and play is perfectly secure. And this is where I went, data. Of course, in this quarter, it doesn't really work out for me, but they really were not of a mind to listen. They were adamant that they were secure, but even in the face of actual raw data that we were able to present them. So this is how I sort of answered back at them. And eventually they went away and left me alone, but it was really amazing is how many of these home routers and various other things that people are attaching to the internet. And as people get more and more into the Internet of Things, or the Internet of Crap, all of these devices being deployed are not necessarily being deployed in anything resembling a secure fashion. Are these devices being used in DDoS botnets today? Not so much. But the year is young, the decade is young. I'm sure that ultimately we will see this in some sort of concerted scale. And the idea of being DDoSed by a bunch of toasters is a little bit concerning. To be fair, I actually found a toaster that was online internet connected in Brazil. It's the only one I've ever found. I don't know if somebody was trolling me, but it was absolutely hysterical that somebody would need internet connection for their toaster. So, moving along, application layer attacks. Now, with the application layer types of denial of service attacks, these are the ones that really bother me the most because you're eating up resources, and if you're a defender of any shape or size, you are more concerned about this than a denial of service attack. Denial of service is a solvable problem. I won't go down there because I'm not going to vendor at you, but you have to understand that when you have an application, if you're not doing any sort of proper protection, you are susceptible to all sorts of attack. Now, from Q4 of 2015, this is the data that we had collected here, and the vast majority of attacks are infrastructure-based. So right there, you can actually help yourselves protecting, making sure that your infrastructure is properly secured, properly patched, properly maintained, properly configured. I wish I had $1 for every time I found a router that had an HTTP interface, and you could just walk up through the URL until you got into the config. There's no good reason for that. So with regards to application layer attacks, the biggest one we were seeing was HTTP GET request, but this isn't all that sexy. But the problem is when these sort of things are, bless you, when all these things are effective, then you end up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, all of these things. So you get all the free pen tests you want. It's just when you get the report, everybody else gets to see it too. So where are these attacks coming from? Now, when I say where are these attacks coming from, this is nailing it down to source IP. This does not necessarily mean that the attack originated in these points. And the biggest one for web-based attacks was actually the United States, ranked in at 56% of all attacks that we saw come through in the last quarter. That's rather substantial. Now, flip that on its head. Which are the top target countries of web attacks? United States comes in number 1. It really invokes the image of Nelson from The Simpsons going, stop hitting yourself, stop hitting yourself. But, oh wow, Canada actually made the list there at 1%. All right, go Canada. And then we take those attacks and we break them out by industry, and the really interesting one that really pops out was retail. Retail was getting hit hard. And I thought about it, and actually it's really quite simple. A few years ago, financial institutions were the big target. Everybody wanted to hit them because they want the credit cards, they want the financial data, they want the banking, because there's money to be made. Banks responded. They got better at security, for the most part. So where did the attackers go? Next logical step, retail. After that, hotels, because they have the same sort of information, but they haven't necessarily taken the time to secure their infrastructure. And this is one of the things that really worries me, is that they need to do a better job of that, because there are attackers coming, or there are attackers already here. For example, there was a DDoS platform that we saw pop up. It was about just over a year ago now, actually. And they would attack a site, and they would say, look, we're going to attack you. First they would send a burst of traffic, say, we've attacked you, check your logs. And if you don't pay us the equivalent of $80 to $150, we're in Bitcoin, we're going to do it again. It was rather curious that the amount was so low. And a few months later, it actually came clear that it was actually DD4BC testing out their brand new monster. And these were folks that were brazen enough to actually come after sites over and over again demanding money. The problem is that, and we've seen news articles about this, is companies would actually pay the ransom demands. And this is a horrible precedent to set because it just encourages not only them to keep doing it, but other actors to join in the fray. So here's an example of an email that the DD4BC folks sent to one of our customers, and it was really audacious. So first, hello, to introduce ourselves, and they give a bunch of URLs to various news articles, or just Google DD4BC. That's got a brass set. And then it says, so it's your turn. All your servers are going to be under a DDoS attack unless you pay us 30 Bitcoin, which at that point in time was actually a considerable sum of money, but Bitcoin being what it is, yeah, not necessarily that value today or 5 minutes ago. So they would claim these absolutely huge attack levels that they were going to throw at people. But the reality is the data was actually far less in the volumetric attacks than they claimed that they could do. But you know what? It's all about marketing themselves and making sure that they have the correct spin. But much to their dismay, it didn't work out so well for some of them. Now, in this particular case with DD4BC, one of their senior folks in Eastern Europe was actually captured by law enforcement. And people are like, oh, great, this is awesome. And I'm thinking, no, this is actually not good because this is just going to encourage more. This doesn't mean they're going to go away. This just means that they're going to continue under a different brand, whatever it happens to be, as well as other folks are out there like, wow, there's money to be made. And that brings up the likes of the Armada Collective. Armada Collective talked a big talk, but didn't deliver much of anything. But they still ended up making roughly $100,000 by one estimate that I read in the media. So it just goes to show you that even though they weren't doing anything, they would actually, doing little, they would make the threat, and the business found it. Is that for me? Tell them I'm busy. They were able to collect about $100,000 simply by saying, you know, we're the big bad wolf. And this is a really frustrating prospect because that gets in the media, and then more people go, oh, wait, I can do that too? And it just keeps going on from there. So one of the types of attacks that they love to lean on is amplification-based attacks. And these amplification-based attacks, probably helps if I speak into it, are usually using NTP, SNMP, DNS, and things to that effect to help amplify the signal that they're trying to send to the intended victim. And it's really amazing that these are all solvable problems on the part of the intermediary. So if they're using NTP or SNMP or DNS to reflect their attack, it's because somebody who's defending their infrastructure hasn't kept their stuff up to date, hasn't properly been patching their systems. Unfortunately, as a result, they end up contributing to the problem. How much of a problem is that? Well, we look here, we go from this side here to over here. We go from here down to here. There's this particular graph. It's Q1 of last year to, Q4 of last year to Q4 of this year. We can see simply just on this data visualization, the amount of traffic, attack-based traffic, has increased exponentially. This is a real problem. These attackers are getting more and more proficient at sending garbage at you that you really shouldn't have to deal with. So what are they using? Well, the really interesting thing, and I'm going to show you some tools that are some tools that are a little older, but it's to make a point. So, for example, Havage. This particular tool is a little bit older, but at the time when it first came out, it was extremely effective. And I've used this against a couple of test sites. You put in your data, you press go, and it worked very, very effectively because a lot of applications don't properly sanitize the data inputs and outputs. This is a real issue. Then when we look at this is a particular tool that was put out by Anonymous to be used by our disposable workforce, the teenagers that are bored at home. Now, this one was used in an attack against the White House years ago and various other sites, and it was really interesting because it was a crowdsourced denial of service. The problem is with this particular tool, it did nothing to obfuscate who was attacking. So a lot of people got in a lot of trouble because they didn't have the wherewithal to go, what else is this tool not doing? So this is the low-orbit ion cannon, which you've all heard about. Later on, we got the high-orbit ion cannon, which I found even funnier. But if you notice, here, I'll even flip back here. So the amount of configuration options here in low orbit, switch to the high orbit, it's fire the lasers. It's getting even simpler for the disposable workforce to become part of the problem. And this is a real issue. They've oversimplified it, but again, we're looking at folks that really should have a good talking to as to what is a good idea versus a bad idea. Then we look at tools like Brobot. This is an older tool that was used by the Al-Qassam cyber fighters, which I mentioned earlier. This was using a lot of compromised WordPress installations. And it was very good at what it was very good at. It could pivot very quickly. If you blocked an attack, they could pivot to a different type of payload within 5 minutes. It was extremely effective. And that just shows you the level that you can go to, especially when you look at the new kind of botnets that are out today, like the Bill Gates botnet that our folks here at the CERT team discovered. It is very, very simple, and they keep getting better and better at what they do. And then the media loves to jump on the tools that are not actually a problem. There was a point about a year ago, I believe it was, where wget came into the media as an attack tool. That frustrated me to no end, because look at it this way. You have a hammer. What can you do with a hammer? You can build a house. Or I can bash you about the head and neck. It doesn't make the tool a bad thing. It makes your intent the problem. And this is one of the issues that I have, is that the media and law enforcement and government officials like to focus on the tools as opposed to the intent and the back behind it. So, what are some of the trends? Well, seeing as how we have a large treasure trove of data that we collect, we're able to actually see trends developing, and we're able to provide this back as an analysis for the wider audience for free. One of the first ones that came out of that was the media grandstanders. These folks absolutely boggled my mind, and I think immediately of the Lizard Squad. The Lizard Squad was, for a while there, very good at doing interviews. And at one point, 2 of their members did an interview with a television outfit. It was either Australia or UK. I'm actually blanking on which. But suffices to say, OPSEC fail. Search the grug. But ultimately, quite a few of these folks got arrested and they went to jail. But what they did do is they highlighted something that is a bit of an alarming trend. It's been around for a while, but it's now gaining more prevalence, more visibility, so more folks are pitching in, is with regards to the commoditization of distributed denial of service. It is becoming so easy to be an attacker now. There are all kinds of cloud-based platforms out there where you can actually, for a very low sum of money, join in the fray. And Lizard Squad was one of those ones that actually brought this prevalence. Because they were media grandstanders, they had this story picked up by numerous outfits. Media outlets, I mean. And this tool was actually built on the code base from another group called the Titanium Stressor. Now, the Titanium group, whether or not they gave it to them or however they came by it, I don't know. But when they deployed it as the Lizard Stressor, the problem is that they did nothing to properly secure it. They didn't even have HT access files. And it was very trivial to pull all of their users out for the first couple of weeks that it was online. But yeah, it was really poorly implemented. But one of the things that really got me, and this is not only with this particular platform, but I've seen it with other platforms, where they would actually show different types of packages that you could buy so you can be an attacker. So you want to buy a 100-second package. Let me just do this. 180 up to 7,200 seconds for $69.99 a month. Let me put a fine point on that. How many people here are coffee drinkers? Shocker. An Americano at Starbucks comes in at $2.30. So if you're having a coffee a day, $2.30 a day. Sorry, wait, did I just do that wrong? I did that wrong. $2.55 for a cup of coffee. This actually breaks out on a 30-day month as $2.30 a day. Actually, $2.33 per day. So for less than a cup of coffee a day, you can launch distributed denial of service attacks. This is how simple these things have gotten. So a couple of things that have come out of this are a lot of these platforms have either booters or stressors. Now, first off, a booter is something that came out of the video gaming massive multi-online player. I'm not even going to try to say that again. Where you could actually target folks and knock them off because they're getting a higher score than you in Destiny or whatever it happened to be, and you get pissed off, and that was what would happen. And this is really interesting that They didn't see this as a problem, but the problem was when they would knock somebody off, it would affect other people, and they went, okay, hold on a second, this is getting interesting. Then came the stressors. Now, back in the 90s when I was working at one particular bank, we had a stressor service that we hired to actually stress test our web applications to see how they would handle under load. They were actually pretty normal and actual legitimate things, but now the underground economy is seeing it as this is a revenue model where they can actually use it. And they call them a stressor as a legal artifact. And this legal artifact is saying, well, we're providing a platform for you to stress test your application. How you use it is really not on us. Unfortunately, that doesn't work out so well in the end. And there's a list of some of the booters and stressors that are out there. The one that really jumped out at me, in particular, was the Big Bang Booter. Why? Because I thought it was the goofiest name up there. And I did some digging and looking around, and one of the things that got me was they actually had a promotional video. I wish I could have the sound for this, but I'll just narrate it. So the video here is a couple minutes long, but I'm only going to play part of it. And they go into the different components of their platform and why they're a good choice for you to invest your Bitcoin. They have private custom source code. You can hit like a boss. So they're right there, they've sort of lost their ability to say, oh, no, we're just giving you a stress platform. And they have a boot page, so if somebody's getting a higher score than you can target them. Untraceable servers, because that works on the internet. And 8 different types of attack methods. And my favorite of all, 24/7 friendly support. So they have actually taken something as an attack platform, and they're pitching it as an actual legitimate business. And that really struck me as odd because I gave this talk a couple of weeks ago, and I brought this up as, this is a criminal endeavor and that sort of thing. And somebody in the room said, well, can you imagine what it would have been if you rolled out a bug bounty platform a few years ago? That would have been seen as a legal thing. So maybe they're onto something here. It's really interesting when you flip it on its head. Now, some of the other highlights that we saw going through our data was we saw DDoS agents that are targeting Joomla and other SaaS-based applications. Anything that is attached to the internet is open season. And this is one of the things that always gets me is because I used to work for a power company, and one of my coworkers, who will remain nameless, said that we only need to scan servers for ports 1 to 1024. I said, why? And, well, those are the only registered ports, so all the other ports, actually, they don't matter because they're not registered as per the ROC. So these were the kind of challenges that I was up against. And they really didn't understand that they were a target because they said, oh, no, we're not a target because we do X. By virtue of the fact that you're attached to the internet, you are actually a target. And it's nothing personal, it's just you're an IP address in a range. Some of the other things that we're seeing as well is SQL-based attacks and account reuse. Account reuse is a really fun one. There's a lot of data dumps that we've seen with the Qatar Bank and other things like that recently. And a really interesting thing is diffing these lists of dumps against other lists like Ashley Madison, things like that, and finding, wait a minute, you're using the same account against multiple things. So you're using your banking password for your Ashley Madison dump. And it's like, this is asking for trouble. You got to use different passwords because, well, that's hard. Humans are actually odd creatures of habit in that regard. Now, the attribution thing is something I don't do. I don't like doing this particular country is attacking this particular country. What I like to do is look at the raw data. And this is what we do here as part of the report that we put out, is we go through and we look at the raw data. And we're not saying that country A, B, or C is doing X. We're saying this is the data as we have collected it. And that's the important delineation there. And that is actually from Q4 of this past year, sorry. And another thing, too, is that we went through here and we were looking at, these are attacks that we had registered. And this was a single campaign where the attackers were coming back on multiple days trying different things. And in the escalating path of the attack, attackers have a lot of free time and they're motivated for whatever reason it happens to be. If it's a bored teenager that's clicking a button, it's a hacktivist that's pissed off at you for some sort of corporate choice that has been made. These are things you have to actually take into account. Are you making teddy bears, or are you making internet-connected centrifuges? Something you have to look at. What is the threat? What is the risk to your organization? And when we break out these attacks based on industry, it's really interesting. Again, we see gaming by and far number one. And because you have a lot of teenagers with a lot of free time getting pissed off. I have to admit, I grew up with pinball and things to that effect. I'm old. But I don't see what the point is of doing this sort of thing. If you're really that upset about it, just play locally or play your friends. But anyway. And as well, then software technology and all the other types of attacks. And we see the variations there based on time. Now, when we look at it as a function of time, this particular one is really interesting. So we go here from Q4 of 2013 right across to Q4 of 2015. We plotted attacks based on the occurrence and the volume. And as we're going across, you notice a pattern that's developing very quickly. That line is getting thicker and thicker. And I don't think it's actually that much out of line to think in a couple of years it'll be just a solid bar. So some of the other observations, as I was talking about, we had SQL injection is a big one, and all of the rest there. And the one thing that always comes up, there's always there, is Java. And I think Java is the most maligned remote access management platform in the world. People like to say it's a horrible, horrible this, that, and the other thing. They're just using it wrong. Now, SQL injection upsets me because it is a solvable problem. Like what I was talking about earlier when I said OWASP top 10. It has been there for over a decade. This is one of the things where we have to sit down and talk to our developers and say, this is what we're seeing, this is the problem. One of the things that we do, and I've done it myself, we say, oh, you're bad developers, you haven't done this. Well, hold on a second. Did I take the time to actually sit down with them and say, this is the problem that we're seeing, this is the stuff we're concerned about? And this is one of the things you got to take away is how do you actually take that message back to them so that they can understand and do a better job? Coders are very good at what they're good at, but if they don't have the proper inputs, how can they make the proper decisions? And with these problems, we have to understand there's a fine reason as to why we have to pay attention to these. This is from a site called Data is Beautiful. If you do not know this site, go searching for it. It is wonderful. Wow, was that ever a pitch? And this is actually a graphical representation of data breaches over the last over the last year. And this puts a fine point on why we have to do a better job of securing SQL injection against SQL injection and things to that effect. And when we look through it, this is from last year. This is a RevSlider upload shell. Now, RevSlider is, when you go to a WordPress site and you see the images filtering by, looks all pretty, it had a pretty bad SQL injection problem. As a result, ne'er-do-wells decided, how do I capitalize on this? Well, they came out with this, and this was a perfect example of why we have to do a good job of patching against SQL injection. And these malicious uploads, the thing that really stood out with me is these are some of the prime ones that were collected out of the data. We have CVEs from 2009, 2012, 2008. This was data collected in 2015. These are old problems that shouldn't have to exist, but unfortunately they do because we're not doing a good job of our own website hygiene. So as a result of that, we run the risk of becoming part of an undead army. So if you are not doing the job of securing your website, securing your NTP, all the rest of it, each one of those pieces could be unknowingly conscripted into a botnet of some description. And when that happens, how long is it before law enforcement or government says, well, actually, because you didn't have that patched to current or N-1, you're now liable? It's only a matter of time before that sort of thing happens. And this is something we have to do, is if we do a better job of hygiene, we help reduce the attack surface that attackers can use to leverage for these sort of events. So, what can we do? Disregarding the first line there. SQL injection, again, I'm hammering away at this over and over again. This is a solvable problem. There is no reason why this should continue. We need folks to do a better job as a defender of hardening their systems. There's too often where I see systems that are deployed that are not properly maintained. I did a search for different types of WordPress installations across the internet, and no word of a lie, I found a WordPress 1.0 installation that is up and running. It's in Russia. You can go hunting for it. It was absolutely mind-boggling that this thing was even up, but there it was. Another thing you can do is work with your upstream providers. If you haven't already moved your web properties to a cloud-based platform of some description, you're still doing the classic hub and spoke, you have to deal with your ISP upstream. They may have solutions that can help you, some way to actually better mitigate it. But even something as simple as putting a bogon list on your edge router, things that you can consider. There's also IP rate limiting, and the number one thing that actually drives me absolutely to distraction is patch your systems. Please, I beg of you. I don't know why this conversation has to keep happening, but we keep doing a bad job of it. And granted, I fell a victim of this 10 years ago. I wasn't properly patching one of my systems, and it got compromised. I felt like an idiot because it was my own fault. Now, when you're looking at all of these different things, you have to understand that this is all born out of the conversation in major media of these are, the big bad things are happening. And when you read these things and you think, oh, yes, maybe they're right. Maybe these big bad things are unsub. And then the data comes along and says no. And we have to actually look at the raw data from whoever the source happens to be, and hopefully not DBIR, couldn't resist. And you want to make sure that you're making decisions based on the proper inputs. If you're just reacting to some C-suite folks that have read an article in whatever publication, they're like, oh, we got to fix this now. I'm less concerned about the 0-day problems out there than I am the 100-day problems. The things that haven't been patched. The Oracle database patch that hasn't been applied from 3 quarters ago. These are the kind of things that really keep me up at night. Now, apparently I've been talking like a smack-addled squirrel, and I've gone a lot faster than I normally do, but I'll just round it up by saying all of the data that's in this presentation has come out of our State of the Internet report. Now, this particular report is available for free. There's a silly little reg wall, but you can get by it. This is something worth looking at. Have a look at it. There's no attachment to it. Use it to make any sort of decisions you need to make in your business environment. And this sort of presentation is absolutely not possible, or these reports are not possible without the folks that we work with. And in particular, our CERT team based here in Florida, these are very smart people. I do not consider myself one of them, but I like being the dumb guy in the room. I like being able to sit with them and see them go, oh, well, you do this, this, and this, and then we pop this system. I'm like, can you say that slowly? No more big words. But because of these great folks, we're able to actually do these sort of things, and full warning, incoming vendor thing, we're hiring. If you want to work with these smart people or put up with my nonsense, go check it out. We're actually hiring. Now, what I'd like to say is thank you very much to HackMiami for having me. I really appreciate all of you sitting here and listening to me prattle on. That being said, do you have any questions? There's my contact detail. Going once, going twice. All right. Thank you very much for your time.